You gotta stand up now.
Oh, no, you sit still.
Do you want me to take the...
Oh, well, this is first. We'll do a few, but the getting this film here. Look at
Okay,
this.
here we go. I don't know.
One,
I
two.
can't see well enough to know
What
what's
you,
going
how
on.
you,
Like,
like
there you
me?
go. Well, we got it.
Oh, that's
I think
unbelievable.
I can't.
You did it.
I did it. Okay. Hey, we did it.
I'm Jewish. I knew my parents wouldn't survive. Why don't I give it up? You know? Nobody knows my name. Nobody knows who I am. I have no identification. I was in the camp. I'm Catholic or whatever, you know, forced labor and that's it. But then I said, no, you can't do that. You know, I mean, I owe this to the memory of my family, my parents. I can't do that. And I went back to Mannheim. That's another story, which is in the book, and you read that. Yeah. And I come to Mannheim, and the first night I'm in Mannheim, I'm arrested at 9 o'clock because there is curfew. It was May, June. By that, it's still curfew, 9 o'clock. So I'm picked up by MPs, and I spent the first night in jail. In my hometown.
Yeah.
Our house was bombed. Mannheim was a very industrial town.
Yeah, no, yeah.
That bombed the shit out of
Yeah.
it. Pardon my language. Don't use that.
Never heard it.
And the person who was in charge of the displaced persons section was an American lieutenant by the name of Albert Hutler, who became my closest friend and mentor. Yeah? And I was interpreter. And for military government. It's all in the book, and you read it, so I don't want to go into, you know, forgive me for...
No, this is fine.
Well, let's talk about Mannheim. Let's start from the beginning here. It's a good segue. Let's talk about the fact that, I mean, that's hometown for you.
That's my hometown, yeah.
And you were born what year?
23.
1923. During that time period in Mannheim, did you get a sense of the political unrest of what was going on in
sure.
Germany generally?
Sure. Hitler came to power in 1933.
Right.
I was 10 years old. I've always been involved and interested in history.
Right.
I read everything. Even then, still today, I read a lot. My whole education is because of reading. And I knew what was going on. The first experience I had was in 1935 when I was not allowed to play on the soccer team. You know, it was my first experience. And then 36, I was kicked out of school.
Right.
In 7th grade, never went back to school again. My parents tried to get me to get out of the country, but we had no relatives. And the only thing that happened to me during that time, and you read that in the book, was the Lindsay family. Remember that? Mm-hmm. Whom I met on the street, who was a member of the family or related to the DuPont family in Wilmington, Delaware. And it didn't work out. There was an American official who was in charge of the visa section of the State Department by the name of, I go blank a moment, the family in the South, the political family, what's the name? He was, no, I'm getting old. My memory isn't so good anymore.
We'll think of it in a minute.
Well, I'll think about it. He was Assistant Secretary of State under Cordell Hull, and he was in charge of the visa section of the State Department. And he issued an edict. It's in my book. Pardon?
Jimmy Burns.
No. I just can't think of the name right now. And he issued an edict to the consuls and I remember the words, to postpone and postpone and postpone 3 times the immigration of Jews to the United States.
I know that name too, and I can't remember it.
I know it like I use it all the time when I talk because it's a historic fact.
Yeah.
And the quota that the United States had was never filled. So I had the opportunity with the Lindsay family, non-Jewish family, to come to this country and was never able to do that. Then came 1938, Kristallnacht.
Now, just for a second, Ernie, when you
Go
were,
ahead.
during that time period, how did your mom and dad explain what was going on? Did you really
They didn't have to explain. I mean, I knew it. I listened to the radio. Look, I was no kid by then.
Right.
You know, in 1938, I was 15 years old,
Right.
you know?
Right.
I knew what was happening.
Right.
I read the papers, I listened to the radio. I knew what was going on.
How did your parents explain to you that because you're Jewish, that there was discrimination going on?
Well, they didn't have to explain it to me.
Yeah.
Look, I was kicked out of school. My two best friends were non-Jews who cut me immediately. The name was, I remember them, Kurt Hess and Heinz Munz. We were inseparable.
Right.
And they joined the Hitler Youth and didn't know me anymore.
Right.
So nobody explained to me. I read the papers, I listened to the radio. I knew what went on. I grew up very fast during that time.
Oh, I imagine.
But how'd you get out?
Absolutely trapped.
You were trapped,
Right.
you know? We didn't have anybody.
What did your father do for you?
Well, my father had a cigar factory. And that factory was Aryanized. And my father was a stamp collector. He had a very big stamp collection. That was really the only thing. And in order to survive, he sold part of his stamp collection to feed the family. My mother sold Nivea and, Tampax, just to put food on the table. Things were very difficult. I really didn't realize it at that time until I grew up later on in this country, what my parents must have gone through. Yeah.
And your family also consisted of your sister?
My sister, yeah. My sister was sent to France on a children's transport. My father took her to the train station, took her to Kreuznach, Bad Kreuznach, and from there to France. That was before the war. That was in April 1939, before the war broke out. And never heard from her again after the war broke out in 39. France and England joined Poland. You know that from history. And I never thought that anyone from my family had survived.
Right.
And I found out eventually that that's another story. That so many things have happened to me that I sometimes I got to pinch myself, whether this really happened to me. I back up again.
Kristallnacht.
Well, Kristallnacht, that was in, when the synagogues were burned down.
So you literally saw that happen?
Oh, I saw the synagogue in flames in Bruchsal, outside of Mannheim, where I worked in one of the last German Jewish factories in Germany. And I worked there. And I heard it, the sirens. I knew the day before that this man had shot vom Rath in Paris. And he died on the 8th of November, and on the 9th of November, the edict was given by the Gestapo, which resulted in the burning of 1,400 synagogues in Germany. I was there. I saw it.
So, what was your impression? Did you think the war had started?
No, I knew this was the end of it. I consider the burning of the synagogues the really beginning of the Holocaust.
Right.
That was really when you realized this was not going to, and then no way to get out, no way. So I was stuck.
Out of control at that
Yeah.
stage.
Then the war broke out. Unless you want to interrupt me, ask something else.
During that time period after Kristallnacht, that's when you were able to get Lottie out, right?
That's in April 1939. My sister was sent to across the border into France, and she wound up eventually with a Jewish family in France. And her life was saved, which I only found out later on, by being in a convent where Catholic nuns kept her for 2 years. I only knew that later on. And to tell you ahead of it, when I worked for military government in Mannheim, one day, Lieutenant Hutler, you know, I always called him Lieutenant Hutler, you know. Later I became Al and Ernie, you know. He asked me to come to his office. And there was, in uniform, attached to the British Army, there was a segment of Jews from Palestine who wanted to volunteer in the British Army. And he was in uniform, and he said, "I understand you are Ernest Michel, you know?" I said, "Yes. I have a letter for you." He says, "It's not possible. It's something. I have your name's Ernest Michel? You're in Mannheim? You're born here?" I said, "Yes. I have a letter for you." He said, "A letter for me? Who's going to write to me? Nobody knows who I am." And there's Ernst Michel envelope, Mannheim. That's all. And he had stacks of letters like that.
Right.
And he said, "This is yours, yeah? Well, here's your letter." And I open it up. It's a letter for my sister, Lotte. He says, members of the Palestine Brigade, that's what they were called, the Jewish Brigade, has been asked to go to Germany with envelopes to see whether people actually survived.
Mm-hmm.
And the letter was written by my sister. "Lieber Ernst, dear Ernst, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but a member of the Palestine Brigade, of the Jewish Brigade, is coming to Germany with letters." And I sent it along. "I don't know whether you're alive or not." That's how I found out that my sister was alive, who was kept by Catholic nuns in a convent in the south of France, and eventually she was sent over the Pyrenean Mountains to Spain. Remember the picture, The Sound of Music?
Right. Yeah.
That's how she went there. And on that transport, she met the boy who eventually became her husband.
So this was 45 late?
No, this was in 42, 43, 42
No, I know,
or
but
4.
when the letter, when you got the letter.
Oh, 45, yeah, when I worked for military
Yeah,
government.
yeah,
That's how I found out that my sister was alive. I mean,
yeah.
one thing leads to another, you know. What else you want to know?
Oh. At some point, you get, in 1939, the Gestapo comes into Mannheim and grab you.
Well, the war broke out on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland.
Mm-hmm.
2 days later, incidentally, our apartment was sacked after Kristallnacht. My mother was beaten up. My grandmother, 85 years old, was in shock. I mean, it was a horrible period of time. And on April 3rd, a Gestapo man knocks on the door. I open the door. Ernst Michel, yeah, 6 o'clock tomorrow morning at the train station. Shut up. You take a suitcase, 6 o'clock. My parents took me to the station. There were maybe 15, 20 kids my age, 16 years old. The reason I was not arrested on Kristallnacht was because I was at that time only 15 years old. People were not arrested unless they were 16.
Right.
So by 1 year, otherwise I would have been to Dachau or one of the camps at that time. You know, these things bring back memories that when I speak about it, you know, I got to tell you that my knees begin to shake.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked your office
Yeah, we have a set.
because sometimes I really get physically to sit down in order to talk, because it affects me still today. Although I do it very often, I can't get away from it.
Can't completely get rid of it.
No, I'll never be able
No,
to.
that's right. Well, you're doing amazingly well.
Well, I try to. You know, it comes with an effort.
You made a decision in 1945, July, to go on.
Oh yes, even before, I never gave up hope.
Never gave up.
Never gave up hope.
So the human spirit was what drove that,
What
right?
drove me is some people have to survive in order to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to be able to, and I've been talking about it ever since. That brought me into the work of the United Jewish Appeal, and I've been with the UJA now for 60 years. For all practical purposes, the only job I ever
Only job
had.
you ever had.
The only job I ever had.
Yeah.
And I'm still today, and I never retire.
Your assistant was told me on the phone that, boy, you're in for a treat.
Well, I hope
Well, I
so.
already knew it.
I hope, because it's personal, you
Oh,
know,
sure,
and I
yeah.
talk about what happened.
Yeah,
That's all I'm saying.
You get, next morning, literally, go back to the story, next
Go
morning,
ahead.
you get picked up and you go to the train station and your
Yeah.
mom and dad
My
say
father-
goodbye. And what's your emotions at that point? Did you have a sense of foreboding at that point?
Yeah, I did. I did. My mother, you know, bleib ein guter jüdischer Junge.
Yeah, I understand.
Stay a nice Jewish boy. And that's the last time I saw my parents.
Yeah.
At the train station in Mannheim on September 3rd, 1939. Eventually, my parents were sent to a concentration camp in France by the name of Gurs. From there, in 1942, they were sent to Trancy, and from Trancy, they were sent to Auschwitz. I only found that out later on. The Holocaust is probably one of the most documented periods in all of history. I know the transport. I know how many people were on that transport. I know how many people were sent to the gas chamber and how many were sent to slave labor. My parents were in that time in their 60s, and obviously there was only one way, to the gas chambers. And people say today this never happened.
Yeah.
So that's, from there I went to, the first camp I was in was a camp called Fürstenwalde for potato harvest. You know, by that time was October, you know. So September, October, and we worked in the potato harvest, never got paid, but we're treated well. We got enough food. From there, one camp after another, and then finally the bottom fell out, and that's when we arrived in Auschwitz. That was, we knew right away this was not another labor camp. That was, I arrived there on March 3rd, 1943. I remember it till, you know, things, I don't remember what I did yesterday or last week.
Right.
Yeah? But I remember almost every incident during that period. It's sort of in my, I'll never forget it.
So you would literally come in on a train, come in on the train with your fellow inmates, if you will, and you literally walk off the train. What's your impression? You'd never had any reason to see that. Pictures.
On February 28th, we were told that the labor camp I was in a town called Paderborn was going to be evacuated, and we were going to send back east someplace. Nobody knew where to. And we were taken into cattle cars at the train station, walking through the town in the middle of the night. They didn't want us, they didn't want the population to see. And we were put into cattle cars. The cattle cars were locked. And 4 nights and 5 days, we were in the cattle cars. No food. We brought something with us, but in the train already in the car, several people died, older ones. And then we arrived in something called Auschwitz. I'd never heard the name. Never knew what it meant. But I knew immediately that this was not a labor camp. So, Juden raus, you know, everything leave behind, nothing, just the way we, and that was in the beginning of the selection process. Thumb up, you went to the right, thumb down, you went to the left. We didn't know what it meant. There was a peculiar smell in the air. I couldn't figure out what it was. There was some sweet smell. It was the burning of the bodies. I didn't know what it was. And we went through, and there was beautifully dressed. I found later on it was Dr. Mengele, the death doctor in Auschwitz. And the thumb went up, and the thumb went down.
He was doing this?
He was doing that. I found out later on. I didn't know who he was. We were scared. You didn't know. We were starving. We were hungry. The only thing we could do, there was some snow. It was March in Poland, cold. So we put some.
This is 43.
The March 1943. That was it.
Paderborn is, you were first of all the first and then Paderborn? How did that go?
Well, I was in Paderborn for about a year. We cleaned the streets and the sewers, you know. It was regular labor,
Yeah,
you know.
sure.
Nobody got killed. I mean, it was hard work, little food, but nobody bought, you know.
And you weren't paid at all there?
No, never paid. Never paid. And, well, that was the arrival in Auschwitz.
And you obviously got the thumbs up
Well,
because
yeah.
you're a healthy-looking guy.
Yeah, I was I was 20 years old. Well, not yet 20. I'm born in July. I was 19, no. So we were sent on trucks. They put us on trucks.
Mhm.
And I'll never forget that statement. There were workers, slave, like we, who were in that striped, this blue, gray striped uniforms. And he said, "You are the lucky ones. Die anderen sind schon rauf im Kamin. The others are already up the chimney."
No.
That's when we realized what Auschwitz was.
Jeez.
That's when we realized. So then we were sent to Puna, Monowitz.
Yeah.
That's where we
But
worked.
you didn't stay there.
No, we were sent back.
Back and
Most of
forth.
the time I was in Puna.
Most of the time?
Most of the time I was in Puna. The only time you went later on back to Birkenau, which where the gas chambers were, when you were gassed, By that time you were down. The Germans scientifically had figured out, the Nazis, that the life expectancy of a slave in Auschwitz was 4 to 6 months. After 4 and 6 months, your body had gone out. You had lost all your, you were down to skin and bones, and you were called Muselmann. Have you heard that expression?
No, but I know what it means.
A Muselmann. A Muselmann is somebody who's down to nothing.
Right, yeah.
And then the selection were at the gate, and you were sent to the left, put on trucks, and sent to Birkenau to be gassed. We all knew that. We all knew it was a matter of time, but the end was a foregone conclusion, unless something happened, unless you were lucky enough to get something extra. And that luckily happened to me. So I worked in Puna for several months until I was hit by an SS man on my head, and it developed into a wound, and I had fever and I went to the infirmary. They had an infirmary there.
At Buna.
In Puna, yeah, where they treated wounds, because you never wanted to stay overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Now then something happened that saved my life. I was there just to get it taken care of so I could get back, work another 2 or 3 weeks. Now something got to happen, because otherwise I'm going to go like everybody else. Well, still, I talk about it a lot, and yet I can never control my feelings about it.
Easily understood.
I get it taken care of, and in comes an inmate, a camp, well dressed, and he asked, "Anybody here has a good handwriting?" Now, what I didn't mention before, so I'll go back and forth really, that in 38, 39, after Bruchsal, after the camp, everything was closed, and no Jewish business anymore, I went back to my, I had nothing to do. nothing to do. My father says, maybe you ought to learn to do something with your hands. I'm writing. I love to write. There is somebody who is still here, a Jewish teacher, who teaches calligraphy. I said, well, I'm going to do calligraphy. I said, well, you got nothing else to do. So I went. So I knew how to, to have a good handwriting, calligraphy. My father.
Yeah. Your father a big man or small?
No, he was a small man,
like your dad.
bald. He, I don't know, he knew, never knew, but obviously. But that saved my life. So calligraphy, so he asks, I come back to that again. Asked me, anybody, so I raised my hand. Says, you know how to write? Yeah, I says, write, Körperschwäche, weak of body. Herzanschlag, heart attack. See, go right through. I hadn't had a pen in my hand for I don't know for how long. So he said, you'll do. Come over here. But in the meantime, I want to get this. He said, come on, sit down and write. So I had to write list. The name and the number, which I have here on my arm, 104995. That's all how we were known. We were not known by name, only by your number. So I sat down and I had to write. And I had fever, but I wrote, Says, you'll do. Says, and he wanted to get me something extra to eat because we were starving. And he gave me a bowl of soup. I'll never forget that. Evidently, it was taken from the bottom, Your survival depended on whether you got the soup from the top, which was water, or from the bottom, where the little potatoes. And he gave me from the bottom a bowl of soup. I hadn't seen that kind of soup. And I started to eat it, and it was salty. The salt had all settled down, and as hungry as I was, I could not eat it.
Oh my, that's really funny.
So he felt sorry for me. His name was Stefan Heimann. I found out later on. He was a communist. Had been in camps.
Well, you said he was an inmate.
He was an inmate, yeah. He was an inmate. He had been for years. He was first in Oranienburg and other camps, and he wound up in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
But he was a very bright, capable man, that saved my life.
Yeah.
He became later the first minister of the interior for the East German communist government.
Yeah.
Stefan Heimann.
Interesting. Did you?
He was the one who was responsible for the fact that I survived.
So this was like early 44?
This was 40, sometime in 43.
Still 43?
Still 43, yeah.
This is maybe a diversion, but what did you have reading material of any kind?
No,
Nothing at all?
no.
Nothing to...
The only information we got, what was going on in the war, because in the factory in Buna, they were Polish workers, who got paid, and we worked with them and for them to carry the heavy cement back and so forth. And where am I?
You're talking about reading material, you didn't...
No, that's how we knew what went on during the war.
Conversation.
Yeah, we knew what the war happened to the war. That then the Russian army were, they were moving. We knew something, not very much, but we knew something was going on.
While at Auschwitz, you had the unenviable task of working as an orderly at some...
Well, this is the work that I did. The writing eventually led to my becoming a medical aide in the Krankenbau, in the infirmary. That was the job I had, and that saved my life, because they brought in food to. There were 5 or 6 barracks in the infirmary in Auschwitz. One for diarrhea, one for heart, whatever people. But these people were, after a few days, immediately sent to Birkenau to be gassed. Yeah? So I became an orderly there, and they brought in the food for the number of people, but some of the people couldn't eat anymore. So we had something extra to eat, and that saved my life. So it was because Stefan Heimann and calligraphy that I became a medical aid in Muna from the fall, sometime, I remember the exact time, of 43 until Auschwitz was evacuated on January 18th, 1945.
At some point during that time period, you actually you come into more contact with Mengele.
I had one other contact with Mengele, because as a medical aid, my friend Hanzo, who was from Czechoslovakia, who was very close to me, he died maybe 3-4 years ago of a heart attack. We were ordered to come to one of the blocks, not the one that I was working in, where a truck arrived. We didn't know what was. We were told that there will be a truck, and we have to take the people to the barrack. And several women come out. There were only women on that truck. And they were brought in for medical experiments. And there I saw Dr. Mengele again, who conducted these experiments with electric shock. I didn't know what electric shock was. How long does it take for an electric shock to... And most of the people died. And there's one story about one of the girls from Hungary, a beautiful young girl, who lost her mind in Auschwitz, were brought in for the experiments. And either they were in a coma or they were dead, and we had to take them in. And boy, there was this Mengele, you stayed away as much as you could. But we took them in, and then I had to wait outside, and then come back and pick them up again, put on the truck back to Birkenau. They were all gassed.
This is all documented at this point.
Oh, yeah. It's all documented. As a matter of fact, there is interesting. I'm going back and forth, forgive me, but it's not easy. In Nuremberg, at the trial, where I became a reporter, we'll talk about that later on, there were 4 nations who prosecuted Nuremberg: the United States, the Soviet Union, England, and France. And I became known, being in the press section, about a survivor of the camp. So one day I get an invitation to meet the chief prosecutor of the Russian delegation, General Rudenko. He didn't speak English, he didn't speak German, there was an interpreter. So he says, I understand you were in Auschwitz? He says, yes. And I told him a story about Mengele, yeah? And he says, would you be willing to become a witness for the Russian prosecution at the trial? It was during the trial, sometime during the spring of 1946. And I said, God, you know, I'm not only a reporter, but I'm, possibly a witness. So I said, yeah, sure, I would tell us what happened. I told him about what I told just now about Mengele. He said, would you be willing to appear? And I said, yes. Well, we'll be in touch with you. And I left, and I was waiting for the call. So one day I called up his office. I mean, we knew each other. I didn't know who they were, but we had contact with each other. I was in the press section by now. And it says, no, there's been a change. It says, you were born in Germany, are you not? So yes. Well, we are not going to have any German. He says, come German, I'm Jewish. This is what happened to me. The only German who was allowed to become a witness for the prosecution was General von Paulus, who was the head of the, I think, at Stalingrad. Or,
Right.
yeah?
Yeah, it's for the Russians.
For the Russians,
Now,
yeah.
I must interject here.
Sure.
I have to get a hold of my wife if I can, because I have a book at home
Yeah,
with hand drawings by a Russian journalist
yeah,
in Nuremberg
yeah.
of his experience.
Really?
What was his name? Do you remember? Anyway, I must get that book to show you, because if I can manage it. My wife is
Really?
a doctor.
Really?
But you will, I mean, this, and then we also have found in the last 60 days, 90 days, a journalist who's now 104. Still alive in Moscow.
104.
104, right? And we have a bodyguard, Rudenko's bodyguard. See, I have all these Russian connections, right?
That's right, you told me that.
And Rudenko's bodyguard is still alive. His name is Hoffman, of all things. I mean, Hoffman in Russia, right?
It's not a Russian name.
No, of course not. And so we found him, right? And one of our people is there. We recruit students in Moscow. We don't recruit students in New York. They wouldn't come to Bowling Green, but the Moscow students are quite happy.
Really?
And so we in fact now have a delegation in Moscow and St. Petersburg recruiting students. One of our people who's there is Russian, got his PhD here. We haven't seen this yet, but Greg posited some questions to carry to
Really?
Sukharov was the Soviet, what he calls the Chief Justice of the Soviet Supreme Court,
Mhm.
still alive, interested in Nuremberg. So we're going to find out if he was at Nuremberg.
Really?
And so we're going to have that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, they wouldn't. The Russians would only let von Paulus.
That's the only German they permitted to be a witness.
What did the Americans do? Did we allow Germans?
Yeah, we had, of course.
Yeah.
One of the witnesses was Hearst. You know.
Yeah, well, that's right. Forgot.
The commander.
Oh, yeah, no, we know that.
Yeah, you know that.
That's right.
He was one of the. He appeared as a witness.
Yeah, and the Germans called him, didn't they?
Well, I don't know who invited him, or I would imagine with America. Maybe Dick Sonnenfeld had something to do with that. You know.
We know that story.
It's a great story. I'll tell you in a second, yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, interesting. Well, let's see if I can get a hold of that book.
Yeah.
It's changing,
But-
letting you relax in that was.
Yeah, but then something about Rudenko.
Yeah.
The secretary, I never saw him again, you know, apologized, saying, I'm sorry, but we have a regulation that we will not permit any Germans, despite the fact that you're Jewish, to become a witness. However, General Rudenko wanted to give you a present. And he gave me a book in Russian, which was the major presentation of the, which I still have at home, about Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm.
A picture book in Russian with all, and I still have that. I kept it.
One of the things that I've discovered is how genuinely, we had so much negative propaganda about our Soviet colleagues.
Yeah.
But they're genuinely just very concerned about their history, but very genuine people.
Yes, they were.
And
Yeah.
so I can understand that
Yeah.
you would be genuinely grateful that you had agreed
Yes,
to
sure.
testify. And
No, he apologized, and he says, but this is a regulation that we have, and that's it.
Well, I'm going to do something here. That this is
I'm going to step out just a second.
this is your article that you wrote for Donna on that book, and to the extent that you might want to read a couple of the first paragraphs, and certainly the last paragraph, which is the one which is perhaps the most amazing for the purposes of the film. I would be honored if you would do that.
This is one of the articles that I wrote in German for the newspapers. And then it was translated and appeared in one of the army newspapers, Stars and Stripes, or one of them. Auschwitz Pictures Tell a Story by Ernest Michel, Dana's staff correspondent, formerly prisoner number 104995 at Auschwitz concentration camp. Nuremberg, that was in February 20th, I didn't remember the date. I have a book in front of me, a picture book, but not a picture book for children. A book which in Russian carries the title International Military Tribunal Nuremberg, and on the middle of the binding it says Auschwitz Camp. The last two words are underlined. The book has no preface at all and very little text. As I said, it's a picture book, but a picture book of reality, and is simply exhibit number such and such, nothing more. And the Russian prosecutor who introduced it in court doesn't say much about it. That's how the article. Begins. By talking to you really brings back detailed memory of what happened at that time. That's where I talked about the medical experiments.
Mhm.
When did these experiments take place? In Auschwitz Buna in 1944. Was Dr. Mengele present when these experiments were conducted? Yes. Did you see him? Yes, I did. Did he conduct the experiments? Yes. General Rudenko was the first person I could talk about the electric shock experiments that Hanso, my friend from in the camp, and I witnessed. And I thought of Diana, one of the girls who was among those who were brought in.
If you had to close your eyes and describe Dr. Mengele, what did he look like?
Normally, ordinary guy, beautiful black SS uniform with a cap. I saw him only fleetingly because knowing who he was, Hanso and I tried to stay away from him. You never knew.
Right.
I mean, they had life and death. You know, they could, the way you looked, you know, send you away. So, first of all, when I saw him for the first time during the selection, I was in shock. You know what I mean? How could anybody experience anything? I later on realized when he said, "Die anderen sind schon rauf im Kamin," I realized that I went through this selection process. So you try to be as far away. So I never expected to see Mengele again. That's when I saw him, when he conducted those experiments. Oh, yeah.
Do you want to take a break? I just had to take a break for a minute.
No, I'm all right.
You're okay.
I'm all right.
And,
Yeah.
at some point, as you're keeping, your antenna is up and things are going on outside the camp, and basically the Russians are coming. At some point, you have knowledge of that. Is that through information you get outside of your, or is it just from internally when the commandant of Auschwitz decides we're going to start marching you out? Was that
Well, we got, I told you, I spoke about that earlier, we got some of the information. I'm born in Germany, and German Jews were in the minority. Most of the Jews who were in Auschwitz were from Poland, and they spoke, you know, and they talked to the workers who sometimes felt sorry for us because they realized who we were, what happened to us. So that's when we heard that the Russian army was advancing into Poland. And we knew that maybe there's a hope, there's possibly something may happen. And then about January 16th, 17th, rumor went around that the camp was going to be evacuated. We had no idea what there were about 60,000 inmates, men and women. We were only in the men camp. There were camps for men and camp for women. There are about 60,000. I found out all this. I learned later.
Buna at this time,
I was still in Buna.
still in Buna?
I was still in Buna. Yeah, working in the infirmary.
Yeah.
And we were told then on the 17th, the day before, that the camp was going to be evacuated. We didn't know what they're going to do with us. Are they going to shoot us? Are they going to, you know? No, the camp, we are going to go on foot. And on January 18th, 1945, Auschwitz was evacuated. and all 60,000, it was a cold, bitter winter, Polish winter. Temperature 30, 40 degrees below zero. Now, Hanso was a very smart guy. He says, Ernst, you know, before
He's your Czech friend.
my Czech friend,
Right.
yeah. He says the only way we can get on this is if we put some paper on your body, because what we had, the pants, the jacket, and the cap. So we got a hold of some cement sacks, and we put the cement, the paper around our bodies. Had it not been for that, I don't think we would.
In 1945, you were still hauling cement, or they were still hauling cement, meant that plant was really not built yet.
Oh no, it was never finished. Never finished. Eventually, the Russians, when they took over Auschwitz,
They
dismantled
Took
it
it all back.
and
yeah.
took it all back.
Right.
Yeah, never produced an ounce of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I knew that.
But how many people were killed there building that factory? Incidentally, that Camp Buna, Auschwitz, the main part of Auschwitz were three camps. Auschwitz I, the main camp, Auschwitz II, which was Birkenau, and Auschwitz III, that was Buna. Auschwitz I and II are still in existence and are have become a major tourist attraction in Poland. There's outside, there's a parking lot, buses from all over the coming. You want to see what Auschwitz is. The only camp that was destroyed was Buna. That doesn't exist anymore. There is a monument there. And I have some photos when I went back. I've been back to Auschwitz about 4 times with groups that I took who wanted to know from somebody who was there what happened. So, but Auschwitz doesn't, the Auschwitz III, Buna doesn't exist anymore.
My son's a radiologist, and he went with friends who are from Krakow
Yeah.
this Christmas, or around Christmas time. And I insisted that if he was going to go to Krakow, he needed to go to Auschwitz with me.
Mhm.
So they did. And
Mhm.
he had no idea. He's 35 years old. Had no idea of the, aside from the fact that he's read some history. So the education purposes are just.
Well, it's probably the single most visited
That's what you said earlier.
site in Poland.
Yeah, that's right.
Thousands of people come.
Yeah.
And there's a museum now in Auschwitz I and Birkenau. There are about 20 barracks standing. There must have been several hundred during the height of the of what Auschwitz was. There are about 20 barracks left. Other than that, you can only see the chimneys of the barrack. That's all that's there. And I realized for the first time when I came back how huge Birkenau was. I mean, it went on and on and on. I don't know how many acres it has, but it's a big complex. About 20 barracks. They've worked on that to keep them the way they were.
So the Russians destroyed Buna. I mean, they didn't. They dismantled it. But who did the Germans try and?
No, the Germans destroyed and dynamited the gas chamber and the crematorium. But before they left. Yeah. The factory was left the way it was, and eventually, after the Russians took over, they dismantled it and shipped it to Russia.
During that march, were you and your friend decide that you're going to escape?
No.
No?
We'd never escaped. There might have been some, but we did not plan to escape because where are you going to go?
Right.
You were hungry, you were thirsty, you were weak. No, we went alone. We never thought about escaping.
Okay.
And the transport eventually arrived in a town called Gleiwitz, yeah? And from there we were sent on open cattle cars and I wound up in Buchenwald. Others wound up in Bergen-Belsen or in other camps. You didn't know where you went. You had no control over yourself. They lined up And we went on open cattle cars to, after maybe another 2 or 3 days on the train, and we wound up in Buchenwald. And I remember one thing in Czechoslovakia, because we were open, they were not closed cattle cars, they were open cattle cars. Yeah? And the people, the train, after all, go through villages. And Czechs saw who these, you know, and they figured out what happened. They threw bread or jacket or something into the cars, so we had something to put ourselves in, and some bread, you know. They had loaves of bread and they threw it in. They realized what was going on. I've never forgotten that. Those were Czechs who tried to at least give us something.
But the Nazis continued to control even when it was clear that, you know, they did evacuate Auschwitz, but even though it was clear that the Russians were approaching, they continued to maintain control and hold that discipline.
Oh, yes, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, we were under SS control all the time.
Yeah.
There was no way of escaping. You know, you had your blue and white striped uniform, and I mean, you immediately they knew you. There was no way.
Yeah.
So we went as directed from Auschwitz, walking to Gleiwitz, and then by train to Buchenwald. And we arrived in Buchenwald probably, we left January 18th, 3 days to Gleiwitz. It was the 21st. Probably at the end of January, we arrived in Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a big German camp, you know. Auschwitz is in Poland.
Yeah, no,
These were camps in Germany.
Now that's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
They took you back into Germany.
They took us back into Germany.
Never gave up control.
Never gave up control. No, never gave up control.
At some point, it ends. I mean, the control. You end up in a farm, didn't you? At some point,
Well, we escaped. Well, let me give you the sequence of it.
Sure.
We arrived in Buchenwald, must have been towards the end of January. In February, there was nothing to do in Buchenwald. There was no work or anything. We just sat. We had got a little bit to eat, not very much, but we got. And then I don't know how it worked out, but 3 of us, Hanso, Felix, who was the third one, and myself, were sent to a camp called Berga. Yeah? Berga was a fascinating event during the war. Berga was a small town near Czechoslovakia. Berga became a camp for American Jewish GIs. I don't know whether you know that.
I didn't know that, no.
Who were caught during the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, American GIs have the tag, you know, with H for Hebrew and whatever they. And they took Jewish GIs, and there was a selection process. And they were sent to a camp in Berga, next to our camp, where they were kept, and they were treated exactly the way we were. Many of them died from hunger, deprivation. They worked in a tunnel, you know, to make a V2, so you know. And I remember one of them, he spoke Yiddish, you know.
Yeah.
And he says, "Who are you?" He says, "We're Jews." He had still an old uniform. And they were American Jewish GIs who were treated just the way we were.
How many of them were there?
There were several hundred.
Really? Yeah.
There were several hundred.
Yeah.
A few of them are still alive.
Really?
Yeah, and I know
You
them.
know them, right?
Oh yeah, I've been in touch with them. Yeah, the fellow, what's his name? You know, by name. He lives in Florida. It's an interesting story. He was one of the GIs who was caught, and he, although he's alive, his mind has. I don't know how to describe it. He only talks about Berga. He calls me up, says, Ernie, I want to talk to you about what happened, you know. And he talks about and talks endlessly, and you know, I mean, I can take a lot, but I don't only want to talk about Auschwitz, you know, and Belga. His name is, I have it in my, you know, he comes to New York, calls me up, Ernie, I got to meet with you. And I haven't got time because he can't stop talking about every day that happened there. But he survived. He gets 100% disability because his mind is, you know, they recognized he can't do anything. What's his name? Bernie Melnick. Bernie Melnick. And they get together, and he invited me to come to their reunion, and I never had the heart to do it because while I talk about a great deal, you know, I don't particularly want to talk to survivors about what, you know, in exchange enough, you know.
It's like going to a college.
Like college, yeah. Bernie Melnick lives in Florida, calls me every once in a while. He's fine, he's in his 80s, my age.
Just only
but his mind is gone.
Was the immigration guy's name Thornton? Thornton?
I don't know the name.
Well, no, that's all right. We'll go back to the. You were trying to anyway.
No.
So you were in Belgar then?
We're in Belga, yeah, and then we worked in Belga in the mines, and came back and we got some food, and then we began in April to hear from the distance the battle of the Allied armies moving into Germany. The Russians here were coming in from the east, and the Allies were coming in from the west, and Germany got smaller and smaller. And towards the middle of April, we heard the thunder of the battle, you know, guns, bombs, you know, whatever and we knew that eventually you're going to come, we're going to be liberated.
Refresh my memory, Buchenwald is where?
Buchenwald is in Germany,
Oh, I know.
near Saxonia.
Oh, I see, okay, Dresden and that.
Yeah, in that area.
Yeah.
Near Weimar.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Near Weimar.
Yeah, I guess.
Weimar is the city of Goethe,
Yeah,
you know?
I know, yeah. Right, yeah.
That was Buchenwald.
Yeah.
And then on
So the Allies
April-
got that far? I mean, the Western forces got as far as
oh yeah, they were moving in. Don't forget, the war was over on May 7th or 8th.
Yeah.
This was April.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So on April 11th, the order was given that Belga, our camp, was going to be evacuated. We're about 2,000 men who were working there, 2,000. It's a small camp, a sub-camp of Buchenwald. And on April 11th, we are told the camp's going to be evacuated. Where to? Nobody knew. And that night we left on foot. The camp was evacuated. The first night we slept outside, you know, the way we were just on the ground. And on April, that was April 11th. On April 12th, the camp commander had a megaphone and he announced the President of the United States, Roosevelt, is dead, and now Germany is going to win the war. Do you remember April 12th when Roosevelt died in Warm Springs, Georgia?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I don't remember it, but I do.
There are two names that I knew from, you know, one was Franklin Roosevelt and the other one was Eisenhower. Yeah, those are the two names that I knew. And now one of them is dead, Franklin Roosevelt. And that evening they shot 10 men at random, you know, put them against the trees. And on April, 3-4 days later, we decided we got to do something. You know, otherwise 5.5 years in the camps, you get shot in the sound of the Allies coming in. So we devised a plan to escape. We talked about several possibilities. Now keep in mind that we were walking, and at night we slept on the ground. There was no way, no buildings or anything. By that time, many of them died on the way. They couldn't take it anymore. So on April 17th, we decided tomorrow we are going to try and make a run for it. So even the SS has to stop for a moment, for a while, to relieve themselves or rest. So we are in a small wood. On April 18th, in the afternoon, during a rest stop, we decided to make a run for it. We pulled our pants down as if we have to, do some business, and we moved back into the back, towards the back in the woods, and then we looked at each other, and on a given signal, we ran. Now you have to keep in mind this was now April 1945, and even the SS knew this is, it's going to be over. So the security was lax, not like it was before. They tried to, they shot, but we were, by that time, we were running, zigzag, so not to be caught. And after 15, 20 minutes, the three of us stood in a wood.
I'm a mere chemist. I'm just along for the ride here.
That's all right. You're doing all right.
So, anyway.
Our next, we're going to switch gears here a little bit.
Go ahead.
And get you to the Nuremberg trials. And I know a man who was intimately involved in getting you to that situation was a guy named Picard. And maybe you could set the scene there as to literally you find yourself in a position where there is this Allied-funded German news agency which is being created since there was no infrastructure,
Nothing.
there was newspapers.
Germany was dead.
Right, and so you are engaged to be a...
Well, it's one of the many stories that happened to me,
Sure.
I told you I went to the military government. Did I mention that? I went...
No.
I want to take you back just a little bit.
Well,
Sure.
We left you at Buchenwald, and you
Yeah.
escaped, and now where are you?
I escaped.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And where are you? And how'd you get
I'm
to
now
Mannheim?
in Saxonia,
Yeah.
in Germany.
A long way from Mannheim.
Wrong way from Mannheim.
Yeah.
And we spent the next 3 nights and days in the woods, and we are starving. Really, at the end of the line. The food wasn't so good in the camp anyway, and they had no food. We ate the rotten potatoes we found and so forth. And we went to a farm, an isolated farm, the three of us, and we asked, can you give us something to eat? And the woman looked at us in our, whatever we wore, and closed the door, and I thought it was the end of it. So she came back, she brought us bread and milk. God, we wolfed it down like, and then I'm the only one, my 2 friends, one is from Czechoslovakia, and the other one is from Poland, I think he was. He's still alive, but that's a separate story. He doesn't remember anything. Hanso, my closest friend, died 4 years ago, and Felix, the third one, lives in a little town in Pennsylvania. Doesn't remember anything that happened. Can't talk about it, but that's a separate story. Where am I?
Well, you're getting back from
Oh,
Mannheim.
yeah. We escape and we work on the farm. We went to 3 different farms in a town called Lindenau, which is somewhere in the border between Germany and Czechoslovakia. And we go on 3 different farms because it's by now it's April, May, and farmers need work. So we worked on 3 different farms from the end of April until May 7th, when the farmer's wife comes out to the where we are working, said, "Der Krieg ist vorbei. Wir haben kapituliert." We capitulate. And I stand there with a 2x4. And what do? I go keep on working, you know. What am I going to do? The farmer was at least gave me a job, you know, and I get enough to eat. So the Hanso and Felix left Lindenau, where we worked, a little hamlet someplace, isolated farms, which was what we wanted. And I stayed until the end of May, working, eating. I always kept my arm covered, you know. I never wanted them to know who I was. And at the end of May, the war was over. This was one small area in Germany that was never occupied, neither the Russians nor the Allies, nor the British or the Americans. And I stayed there on the farm, totally unmolested. And I worked. At the end of May, I got my strength back. I had good food by now, bread and butter, but I was very careful not to eat too much butter.
Right, fat really bothers
Fat,
you.
oh yeah, the many people.
Does it still bother you?
No,
Doesn't-
it's finished. But I know people who died
Really?
from
Yeah,
like that, but I was careful.
yeah.
Hanso told me, don't eat the butter, you know, just bread slowly to get back. He was right. Hanso died about 4 or 5 years ago. He was like my brother. We were together in Auschwitz, in Buchenwald, in Berga, and he died. Felix can't talk to him. I saw him once when we had I think I wrote about that. But he had no idea. Totally out of his mind. Never got married, and he's a victim.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
Where was I?
So you're now back in Mannheim.
Now in early May, I decide to find out what happened to my family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the farmer wanted me to stay, but I said no. I got to find out what happened to my family. So they packed me a package of food, you know, and I walked towards the west. And then I'm stopped by a black American GI, you know, with and so I put up my hand. Says, you know, he doesn't speak a word of German, and now my English isn't that great. I knew a little bit, so go over there. So I go over there. There are German prisoners, you know, soldiers who were captured somehow. And they want to talk to me. You know, I didn't want to say who I was. I was scared. I didn't know what's going to happen to us, to me. So I'm with the German GIs, German soldiers. So they sent us, the first experience I had, I was into prisoner war camp. Because I can't talk. I didn't want to know. I kept my everything covered. So then we are interrogated, one by one, by the Allies. There was a Jewish guy, obviously comes from Germany, he spoke perfect German, and he said, all right, name, Ernest Michel. Born Mannheim. What unit? No unit. What were you? I was in a camp. You looked up. You was in a camp. What camp were you in? Auschwitz, Buchenwald. Who are you? What are you doing here? You're Jewish? I said, yes. Stopped everything. He says, come with me. That everybody was standing in line to be interrogated, who they were, what unit, and so forth. And he brought me to one of the barracks where they American officers were sitting, and he said, "Look whom I found. There's a Jew among the soldiers." So they looked at me and said, "Who's this guy?" So I said, "Here, Auschwitz." "You were in Auschwitz?" The first time they saw somebody, and that was the first time I talked about what happened. And I stayed there. They gave me food, and then he gave me a motorcycle. "What are you going to do with yourself now?" "Well, I want to go back to Mannheim, where I come from." He says, "How are you going to go?" "I'm going to walk." "What else are you going to go?" I said, "Do you know how to ride a motorcycle?" "No." He says, "Well, can you learn how?" I said, yeah, sure I can learn." So he got a motorcycle. And I stayed there for a couple of days. They kept me, gave me terrific food, American, And I went back to Mannheim. I mean, you know the story. I don't know whether, did you read my book?
I haven't, though I didn't know it till today.
All right. I come back to Mannheim. Mannheim is 90% bombed out. Mercedes-Benz was there, 90%. I went to where we lived, Richard Wagner Straße, 26.
Really?
Bombed out, Yeah. So with my motorcycle, I at 9 o'clock is curfew. I got no place to go. So MP comes around and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I used to live here." "Who are you?" He says, my name was in a camp. I know how to talk about it with a little bit of English that I spoke. He said, "Well, you can't walk around. Where are you going to?" He says, "I have no place to go. This is where we lived. The parterre, the first floor." And he says, "Well, we got to take you to jail." He says, "Not because you're not going to stay in jail, but you cannot be on the street. Curfew." So first night in Mannheim, I'm in jail.
Like your agent.
Yeah.
The next morning he says, "Well, what are you going to do now?" I said, "Well, I don't know where to go." He said, "Well, maybe you better go to military government. They have an office there." There was one of the buildings that was standing, and I go to the military government, and there I park my motorcycle and look around, and I see an American officer. He has the 10 Commandments on his label, And I look at it. That's Jewish, So he saw me looking. He says, "Where are you looking?" He says, "What's this?" He said to me, "Who are you?" I give my name. What are you doing here? "Well, I'm born here in Mannheim, in this town." "You're born here? Are you Jewish?" I say, "Yes." He spoke Yiddish, and I spoke a little English. He says, "What are you doing? You're Jewish? You're born here? And what you did last night was in jail." He says, couldn't believe it. He says, "Come on over. Who are you? What happened to you?" Well, I told him I was in the camps. I'm born here. First day I'm back here in Mannheim.
Yeah.
"You are born here in this," couldn't believe
I
it.
didn't believe it.
He was a chaplain in the army.
What was his name?
Hazelcorn.
Hazel.
Abraham Hazelcorn. He married me.
No.
Oh,
kidding.
is that right?
Wow.
He married me. He's long dead now.
He's the guy that got you to Nuremberg then?
No, that's a different story.
Different story, okay.
That's that I'm not going to talk about now.
Okay.
No, that you got to leave me something for later.
Okay.
Well, at some point, on to Nuremberg, you literally, through this Allied created, funded news agency and DNA,
Mhm.
Donna, you through kind of Colonel, is it Colonel Picard or?
Captain Picard.
Captain Picard.
Captain Picard.
Sort of
Yeah.
introduces you or to the concept or
Well, wait a minute. Go back a little
Sure,
bit.
yeah.
You know, I worked eventually for Lieutenant Hutler, the head of the displaced persons section of the American Army
Okay.
in Mannheim, in charge of the repatriation, the foreign laborers from Belgium, from Holland, from all over. There are millions of foreign laborers in Germany. And he was in charge in Mannheim. And the chaplain brought me to Lieutenant Hutler.
Oh,
Yeah?
yeah.
Says, you ought to see who this, there's a guy I found from Mannheim. He's born here. He couldn't believe it. I was the first Jew to come back to Mannheim. And eventually he gave me a job. I was an interpreter.
This is
I got,
Hutler.
pardon me?
Butler.
Hutler,
Albert
yeah.
Hutler,
Yeah, Albert Hutler,
Yeah.
yeah. He died about 5-6 years ago. He was my mentor, and he became like my father.
We know those words well in the university.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. So I work for him, and I go with him, and he gave me the first place I lived in because he found out I was in jail. He confiscated a house, Oh, God. I haven't talked in these details for a long, long time. But it all comes back,
Sure.
It's engraved. So I work for him as an interpreter, takes me all the way around, I like his assistant. And then one day he tells me there's somebody whom I think you should meet. An American officer he's in charge of the development of new German newspapers. Yeah? There were no newspapers in
Yeah,
Germany.
this I'd not known before.
There
That
was
makes
no
sense,
newspaper,
yeah.
there was no radio, there was nothing.
Yeah.
Germany was at a
Dead.
dead end,
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything was run by military government.
Yeah.
He would like to meet, I told him about you, he wants to meet with you. So Picard and I meet, and he says, you're born in Mannheim? I said, yes. What's your background? He said, well, I was kicked out of school at 7th grade in Mannheim, never went back to school. Do you know how to write? Well, I think I always liked writing. He said, I'll tell you what, we are now licensing German newspapers to print to publish, because people have to know what's going on in the world. So the first newspaper is going to be in Heidelberg, which is just outside of Mannheim, maybe 6 miles, 10 kilometers. And there's a man whom we've appointed to run the paper by the name of Theodor Heuss. Yeah? I never heard the name Theodor Heuss. So, you know how to write? Well, I think I know how to write. I love writing. I love, and by that time I have my strength slowly coming back. And I meet Theodor Heuss. And he says, I'm told you were in the camps. You're born, says you speak fluent German. Obviously we speak fluent German.
Language, yeah.
Have you ever written? Well, I always enjoy writing. Says, well, we are looking now for a few people who can work with us on the newspaper. It's not printed yet, but we are working on it. It should be going in a few days or so. Called the Rhein-Neckar-Zeitung. Yeah, Rhine, the two rivers, which are close to Mannheim. He says, would you be interested?
I never knew that until you said that before, that was the first paper.
That was the first paper.
I did not
Yeah,
know
it was the first paper. And Theo, Ernst, we got to know each other. And I became a reporter for the first German. I still have at home a copy of the first issue of the Rhein-Neckar-Zeitung.
And you have a whole packet of stuff that you wrote.
Oh
Is
yeah,
that what you
yeah,
said?
yeah. But no, I have nothing of Mannheim.
Oh, I see.
Nothing. Why I talked about the local things.
Yeah, I see.
I mean, look, I never been to school, 7th grade. So he gave me a job. The only one they wanted to hire were people who were not Nazis, who
Right.
were clean.
Yeah.
That's how I got the job.
Yeah.
So I wrote about local stories, and I never kept the first issue, but a friend of mine who was with military government had a copy of it, and he gave it to me.
Great.
So I have it among my records. So I work for the newspaper now. I still live in Mannheim, in the house that the army gave me, and I commute back and forth on my motorcycle. And then I hear about that the Nuremberg trial is going to begin. And I learn about it. And I told Theo, look, could you send me, I'd love to go to Nuremberg for the trial. I understand there's 4 governments. I read about what was going on. I listened to to the army radio. And this is something I would very much like to do. He says, do you think you can send me to Nuremberg as a reporter for the Rhein-Neckar-Zeitung? And he thinks about it, he says, I'll tell you what, I'll do better than that. There's going to be a German news agency that's being created called DANA, Deutsche Allgemeine Nachrichten. I will tell them about you, and you know how to write. I mean, I see your story, you know, and maybe they might give you a job. Gee, that'd be great to become a reporter in Nuremberg. You know, my mind was, you know, and this is how I was introduced to Bill Stricker. Bill Stricker was a German Jew, born in Germany, was a captain in the army who was in charge of creating the DANA, you know, which was run by the American military government. And I talked to him, and it was by now it's about September, October. He says, and he invited me to come to Nuremberg to try to see whether he talked to me only on the telephone.
Right.
And he invited me to come to Nuremberg, and I come to Nuremberg on November 19th, the day before the trial opens. And he gives me a room where I can stay, you know, and Nuremberg was bombed out.
Nothing left of it.
You know, nothing left of it. But there were some rooms for the air. So he get me a room, and he says, look, I'd like you to come to the first session of that's
It's
when.
Stricker now.
Pardon me? Stricker, yeah. So you know what's, and then I'd like to see if you could write something, how you know, about it. So he wanted to try me out to see what I look like and whether I am legit, you know.
Reliable.
So I come to, and I never wrote that story. I was so, I tell you, the first day I come to Nuremberg, and they gave me a little temporary pass in the press section, and I don't know who they are, and I have the only suit I had, which was given to me by Hitler, and here I am, and the people, all the maybe 50, 60, 100 people, all reporters, and I'm sitting there.
Suddenly you're a reporter.
No, I'm not a reporter yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. And I'm sitting there, and this is when Jackson spoke. I'd never heard the name Jackson. And he spoke, and this is part of the thing what I'm going to talk about today, among the things. And then Stricker asked me, why don't you write your impressions, you know? So I would. He says, I think you'll do fine. He was a Jewish guy, Stricker from New York, who was in charge of the press, you know, to develop the new press in Germany. By that time, every day, new newspapers were licensed by the military government. And he says, well, I'd like to have you join our staff. When can you come? Well, I had to wind up my affairs. He says, can you get me, will I stay? Worked it out for me. And then, after I was there for a couple of days, just to get the feel of it, and then he says, I think I'd like to have you join our staff. And that's how I became a reporter for Dana at the Nuremberg trial.
I'm going to pause because this is so remarkable that you, Ernest Michel, walk into that courtroom November 20th, 21st, 1945, and you observe for the first time the beginning of the prosecution of those 21 individuals who persecuted not only you personally, your family, and your race. How did you feel?
Till today, Greg, I find it difficult to realize this is what really happened. I'm a survivor. 7 months before the opening of the trial, I'm in Berga. I escaped from Berga. I saved my life. I now have worked for military government. I now work for Theodor Heuss in Heidelberg, and now I'm at the trial. I had to sort of pinch myself that this is really true. And I sit there in the press section. I didn't know who the others were. I only found out later on somebody, Murrow, Kaltenborn, and the press from the world is there.
But they were young too. I mean,
Of course they were young. Otherwise they wouldn't be, Of course they were young.
So they were formative as well.
Yeah. So I kept very quiet to know, how you deal with these people. Who are they? All correspondents from the world press. And I sit there and I look, and there is Göring and Hess and Keitel and Kaltenbrunner and Streicher sitting not more than 25, the 20, 25 feet. And I said, this is not real. Here I am as a 22-year-old guy, never had any education, and I'm now sitting there supposed to report about what's happening at the trial. But I must tell you, I don't know what it is. Is it genes or is it my background? But I adapted to it very quickly. Now I realized that I'm sitting there not as a survivor, but as a reporter. And if you're a reporter, you have to report. Now, I still was on a tryout at that time, I had not yet given officially the job, although he told me this is what we'd like for you to do. I had to wind up my affairs in Bad Nauheim, which was the headquarters of Dana. And I could not believe it. I simply, the contrast of Auschwitz and Buchenwald and Berga, and here are the 21 defendants, the people, the surviving leaders of the Nazi government. And I'm seeing them. And I had to control myself. These were the people responsible. The surviving, Hitler was dead, Goebbels was dead, the leaders of the Nazi government. And sometimes I felt I wanted to jump down, grab them. Why did you do this? It was, that's why I say the Nuremberg trial and my coming there as a reporter and as a survivor was without any doubt of two major events that happened to me, the single most event in my life that will be with me as long as I live. The other one is the World Gathering, which happened much later, happened in 1981. But by that time I had grown up and, so I'm sitting there. I wasn't writing yet, I saw it. And to sit there, I felt in many ways that I represent all those who didn't survive. My parents, by that time I had, although I didn't know the details, but I knew they were in the 60s, you know, anybody in Auschwitz at 60 was in the gas chamber. And I went there for a few days, and then I went back to Bad Nauheim to pick up my, you know, my papers and clean up my apartment. And then I got a room in Nuremberg, and then I became a reporter for Dana, and I had to sit down and look. I'm not the stupidest guy in the world, but I realized that I have to report. And a reporter has to report. I can't put my own feelings into it. But Stricker gave me the opportunity to write some personal stories. That's why I wrote that story about the book about Auschwitz, you know. But most of my articles were I mean, I didn't write well enough in English, so I became a reporter for the German news agency. And then my articles appeared in all the German newspapers with my byline, Ernest Michel, Dana staff correspondent. This is how the articles appear. It seems, you know, I use the word incongruous. The contrast between Buchenwald, Berger, and then being in Nuremberg, it's something that's difficult to describe. Until today, I cannot, well, I believe it because I was there, and I know it, and I wrote about it. And I was lucky enough, I kept all my articles that I wrote in Nuremberg in a book, which I'll show you sometime. And in that book, I have the autographs of 12 of the 21 defendants whose attorneys were able to get me the order. I never asked them, I couldn't get near them. The only time I got near them is when Stammer took me to Goering. He had made his own, I don't know how he did it, but he arranged for me to go to meet Goering, who wanted to meet with me. But that's a different story. I'll talk about that later on today, if I have any voice left.
Let me just, this is you obviously were, obviously at Auschwitz, obviously the commandant of Auschwitz was Rudolf Höss.
Rudolf Höss.
At some point, he's testified.
I don't know that.
And
Rudolf Höss at Auschwitz.
Did you see him at Auschwitz at all? Would you have any chances?
No, I never saw him.
But when he's on the stand, were you there when he?
Oh yeah, when he testified.
I mean, you talk about emotions.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you having survived, so you're a Holocaust survivor, listening to the testimony of the guy who was the commandant at Auschwitz, and I didn't, frankly, as I read this a number of times, your book, this last night it hit me. And that's why I brought this book with me. You can have that.
Thank you very much. I want to keep that.
But what was your emotion seeing Rudolf Höss?
Well, by that time, when Höss appeared on the witness stand, this was further along in the trial.
Right.
By that time, I had, you know, and sometimes I must tell you, the trial was boring, you know. It was not always exciting. You know, did you read this document and so forth. It was like a regular trial. It lasted about, 6 or 8 months. By the end, I wasn't there anymore. And Höss, to me, by that time, I'd known the name, but that's the only thing. I never met him when he was running Auschwitz. He was relieved of his, I think, in 1942, 43. Something like that. I don't know the exact time. And he said, and this is what I wrote in my book, I think, the total number of people gassed in Auschwitz was 2.5 million. And I found out later on, as I studied that period from a historical point of view, that the actual number was 1.5 million. He exaggerated on the witness stand. And he appeared, I think, 1 or 2 days, I don't remember exactly. So many things happened during that time.
Sure.
Ollendorf, you know, who testified, you know, which is, I think I wrote about it in my book.
Ollendorf led Whitney Harris to Hess.
I beg your pardon?
Ollendorf led Whitney Harris to Hus, didn't he?
Yeah, Hirsch. And this is just interesting, just a sidebar. In our interviews, the person who got the affidavit,
I've not seen that.
the person who got the affidavit was Whitney Harris, who was a prosecutor, still alive,
Still alive.
in St. Louis. And he came to the Jackson Center. We interviewed him, just
Yeah.
like we're
Same way.
interviewing you.
Yeah.
And Whitney was the guy who got the affidavit, did the interrogation of her,
Yeah.
Ollendorf first,
Yeah.
that kind of knew there was this, was going on at Auschwitz, and the Einsatzgruppen, that was Ollendorf, and then subsequently did this, and that became the evidence at the trial you watched. I mean, think about connecting all the dots here. He got the affidavit, it then became part of the testimony, and you're watching it as a survivor of Auschwitz.
That's right. It's incongruous, you know. It's
Whitney describes Hus as being sort of like a store clerk. You know, sort of his impression of Hus was.
Oh, as an individual, I mean, a guy who was
totally not unimpressive.
no, very, very low key, sitting there, bent over.
Right.
You know, I still vaguely remember what he looks like, although I wouldn't know it anymore. And as you know, he was hanged in Auschwitz.
Yeah, no, I know.
In front of the, looking at the barracks.
And I asked Whitney this question, and the question was, Whitney, you were in the middle of all this depravity, how did you handle it? Sort of the same thing that you remarked about a minute ago.
Mhm.
His answer was, I was a lawyer.
Mhm.
And you said, I was a reporter.
That's right, I was a reporter.
Yeah, and you were able to transpose or transfix yourself into that. That's a very mature thing for
Well-
a 22-year-old, you know?
Of course, I realized that I always knew not to cross the line, you know. When you're a reporter,
Right.
you're supposed to report.
And
So
your
I said,
papers, your work would not have been accepted if you
had I,
crossed the line.
right.
Yeah.
But then Stricker gave me the opportunity to write some personal stories. One about the book, yeah,
Yeah.
about the Auschwitz book. One about, I wrote several stories which were translated and appeared in the Stars and Stripes in some of the papers. And
Did the book story appear in Russian?
well, I don't know whether
don't
they did not. But what I do know is, as a result of Nuremberg and the
Okay.
and all that happened, and after I appeared on television in Germany, I was contacted by the Russian film by Russian news, and they came to New York. They wanted to know about my
This
experience.
is 46 or so?
Just recently.
No, this was recently,
Oh, I see.
2 years ago.
Sorry about that. I
Yeah.
thought it was interesting.
They wanted to interview about Rudenko
Yeah.
and my experience with the Russian delegation. So
What goes around comes around.
what goes around comes around. So I never saw it, you know. I never, but I know it appeared in.
We'll figure I will get it for you, I think.
Yeah, you'll get it for you.
Can you get it?
I think so. If you just give me some more detail. We'll
Well,
find it
I
for
was interviewed by Russian television.
Yeah.
That's all know a major television
you. Yeah,
station.
how long did the interview last?
Oh, it was an extensive interview. My whole story.
After you talk this afternoon, I'll get a little more information.
Okay, I don't remember the date when it was. Or maybe I have it. Gee, you know, our office is being renovated.
If I call your assistant, does she know?
No, she wouldn't know. I have, you know, this book. This is incidentally, if you promise not to tell anybody, I'm computer illiterate. You know? Really,
Yeah.
I do not know how to do it. I'm scared of it.
Right.
I type like this, you know. So I took lessons. I never learned it. So I have a book like this of every year since 1948.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And you know what I did, idiot? We renovated our building, and I threw everything out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, me, a
You gotta
collector,
send your stuff to him, he'll keep it. He won't let that in.
being a collector, that I did this. Otherwise, I could have told you exactly when I had the interview.
Well, I'll make work of this. And so you spoke to the Russian television about Rudenko.
About Rudenko, yeah,
Okay.
primarily.
We're trying hard to find Rudenko connections from a completely different angle.
Uh-huh.
Okay? And anyway, so go ahead, Greg. I don't mean to interrupt.
Where am I?
Well, we're in the middle of Nuremberg trial. And I'm just going to throw out a couple of names.
Please.
Kaltenbrunner. Ernst Kaltenbrunner. What was your reflections on him?
It's part of what Kaltenbrunner was in charge of the camps.
Right.
And he stated that he knew there were 3 or 4 camps in Germany. He never knew what took place there. I had no idea. When he was asked whether this is your signature on a document, he says, "No, that is not my signature." And I remember even the judges couldn't believe it. You know, there was Reichssicherheitsamt, the Reich, the country security. He was in charge of it. He only knew 3 or 4 camps. Never knew what went on there. Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig in German, you know? Every one of them. Nobody admitted anything.
Who was his lawyer? Stammer?
I don't remember who. I have some of their autographs in my book, which someday when we get together, I'll bring it maybe.
We'll make it happen. Julius Streicher. You look at Julius Streicher. Boy, what's your reaction?
God, Streicher was the personification of evil. I appeared once in the Stürmer. There was a Schwimmbad, you know, a swimming in the Rhine, you know, which was cut, you know, and I was there when the Jews were sent out. They couldn't go there anymore, yeah? And a story about the Jews leaving, being kicked out of the Herweg, I think was the name of the Schwimmbad, of the pool where we used to go. And so I appeared once in the Stürmer, you know.
Oh, you did?
I did,
Oh, my
yeah. Appeared once in the Stürmer.
Oh, I thought I was trying to see what Der Stürmer had to do with.
It's part.
Nuremberg. The answer is you.
All the Jews were
38
thrown
or
out.
9, right?
No, earlier than that.
Earlier than that. Yeah.
I don't remember the year. Earlier than that. I didn't fully answer your question.
Well, just a reflection on Streicher. I mean, there you literally within 25 feet of him.
Even the other defendants tried to isolate themselves from him. That I noticed, because he was just, as I said, the personification of evil. You know, all the Jews with the crooked nose, and what we did and how we, you know, it was a pornographic sheet. He was later on found out that he had some homosexual or experiences or whatever. He was probably, even the other Nazis didn't want to have anything to do with him, I noticed. You know, didn't talk to him.
They made him eat alone. That's what Harris said.
Yeah. Well, he was among those hanged.
No, yeah.
By that time, I was in the States already.
Yeah.
I got to tell the Goering story. I know that. I know. Just to set up, because from your book, you clearly he's the marquee defendant, and clearly that was not Stalmer had knew about you, and there was almost an opportunity to meet him, and that was something you were looking forward to.
Yeah, I you know, by now I'm a reporter, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
And an interview with Hermann Goering, you know, I was 22 years, you know, I thought that'd be great. Stammer, during the intermission, you know, during the day, Stammer came, he saw me, and evidently he knew who I was. He said, "Are you the one who's reporting for Dana?" He says, "Yes." "You mean you were in Auschwitz and Buchenwald?" And I said, "Yes." "Well, we read your articles. The Nazis were only allowed to read German newspapers. They did not get American or British, whatever, you know, only German."
You mean after 45?
when they were in jail.
When they're in jail.
They
Oh, I
were-
see those.
This is in Nuremberg.
Okay,
you
yeah,
know?
I understand, okay.
And they all reading your articles. And are you the one who? Yeah, that's me. You mean you were in Auschwitz and Buchenwald? So, I said yes. And you're the one who's writing. Couldn't believe it. So, a couple of days later, he comes to me again during the, after some of the intermission during the day. He says, Goering read your articles, and he wanted to know whether you would be willing to meet with him. And I thought, gee, I'm going to meet Hermann Goering. I'm going to interview him.
Is that what he wanted?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Stammer said he wanted to meet you,
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, I think I'm going to do that. He says, well, let me work it out. And somehow or other, he worked out that I would accompany him after the session was over. And he took me to his cell. And on the way, he says, I want you to know I worked out the arrangements with the security, and the only thing I must tell you, you cannot write about it. You cannot talk about it, because I'm taking it on my responsibility. So I was taken aback, because there goes the story. But I said, look, I'm so far. This was on the way down in the basement. So I'm nervous. It's one thing to say yes, it's another thing to confront it. So I go there in the cell, he says, this is the man, and I froze. I could, with all my bravado, this is more than I can handle.
He actually extended his hand to shake.
And extended his hand out. And I pulled my hand back. And I didn't say a word. I went to the gate and asked the MP to let me out.
So Stammer wasn't there?
Stammer took me there. Sure, he was there.
Okay.
And he looked at me, and I remember Goering standing there. And I didn't say one word, and until this day, I have not regretted it. I did it instinctively, I could not shake hands. Mr. Goering, how do you feel? Are you being, I couldn't do it, so I walked out, and the MP let me out, and I waited out there for Stammer to come back, and he was disappointed. And but I couldn't even talk at that time. It still today, I think I did the right thing, that I did not interview him. So that was my experience with Hermann Goering.
Wow.
And then the next day or so, he gave me a picture, a page with his autograph.
Okay.
That was the first autograph of my collection. That led me to begin a collection of everything that I could get a hold of from Nuremberg, from afterwards, what happened to me, and the history of what happened to me. And I built a very, very big exhibit, a collection of Judaica, including events from Nuremberg, including the book that I have with my articles. Not reprints, the actual articles that appeared in the newspaper, I have in a book that I think I'm going to give eventually to Yad Vashem.
Yeah.
They want it, and I've been approached by some Germans about whether I would be willing to sell the autographs. I said, no way,
Yeah. No, nor should you.
no way.
What a life experience. As you now sit here in 2006, what is the legacy of the Nuremberg trial that you covered? What's the lesson we've learned?
Greg, I'm going to talk about that today
Then I'll
at
save it.
lunch.
Okay.
You're going to tape it?
I'm going to tape it today.
Okay. So,
We'll stop.
so let me wait till then.
I will do that. I'm going to give you another name. Look at Raphael Lemkin. Talk to me about him.
Again, I'm going to talk about it today,
Okay.
but briefly I'll answer. I had never heard the name. When I was asked to speak in Berlin, I decided to look into the history of what happened since then. And I read books about what happened, how it happened, when it happened, and I came across of the name Cardoza Law School. You know Cardoza? Mm-hmm. They have a woman on their staff who was very helpful, who gave me all the material. Forgot her name. She's one of the executives at Cardoza Law School. And for the first time, I read the name Raphael Lemkin. Never heard the name before. Neither have most people. Do you know there's a play now in New York about Lemkin on the stage?
No kidding.
Yeah. I don't know whether it's still playing or not, but it opened while I was in Arizona. I don't know whether it's a play about Raphael Lemkin. Now, Lemkin is one of the most unknown figures in the history of this whole era. Lemkin was born in Poland, was a lawyer, Jewish, who lived in the United States. And he, like everybody else, learned about what happened during the war, during the Holocaust. And he became obsessed with it. What happened to his family, to the Jews in Poland. And he decided on a one-man effort to do something about it. He was a poor man. He lived in a one-room apartment in Manhattan. And he began to corner, and I'll talk about that, but I don't mind telling you about it now. And he talked about to anyone he could get a hold of. That was just before the founding of the United Nations. 45.
Oh, way back then.
Yeah, 45, 46. And he cornered every individual he could get a hold of. Members of staff of the UN, prominent individuals, senators, congressmen, priests, wealthy individuals, anyone, because he became obsessed with it. And he wanted to try for the United Nations to pass a declaration. And he coined the word genocide. He's the one who coined that word, genocide. And the first person who responded to him was Senator Proxmire of, I think, Wisconsin. And Proxmire took it on himself. He was the only one who really responded to do something about it. And Proxmire, with the push of Lemkin, was able to convince the United States government at that time, I think it was Truman already, and colleagues in the Senate, to create a push to use the word genocide and try to get the United Nations to declare that what genocide was and how it could be dealt with. That I'm going to talk in detail more about it this afternoon. And eventually 135 nations signed the declaration at the UN, and it's become international law, and it led to what's happening in The Hague now. And we'll talk about that this afternoon, if I have enough strength left to talk.
In fact, we should probably stop it.
Should break, I think, you know.
Give you
Yeah.
Well, you've energized us.
Right.
It's such a singular story.
Yes, it is.
That you've had, and what you've done since that time with the United Jewish Appeal, and really making an extraordinary effort to not only document it in a book, but to speak as much as you have, and clearly you give much back to our whole generation.
I have tried to, Greg. I believe that my wife tells me, and my friends tell me, Ernie, you were saved for a reason. Yeah, no, I never said that. But I have, because of genes or whatever you want to call it, from the first time that I was interviewed in Germany, but I was still there, in Nuremberg, and before I came to the United States, I was able to deal with it in a positive way. I don't know why, I don't know how. Some people can never talk about it. I began to talk about it from the very beginning. And I think it helped me to overcome it and deal with it. I can talk about it with all the details, and then I can go out and have a nice lunch and a nice dinner. And, you know, it's genes, you know, it's nothing special about it. This is the way I look at it. And this is why I don't mind talking about it. I enjoy talking about it because I think I can make a contribution to history. Forgive me, this sounds like a dramatization, but really, this is how I feel. I'm such a lucky person to be able to do that, and I will continue to do it as long as I possibly can.
Well, we're lucky to be here to listen to it, and more importantly, those people are going to be very lucky to hear you.
Well, I look forward to it.
I've lost all track of time.
It's 10 after 11.
Wow.
You need to take a little bit of a break, I think.
Well, I tell you, this is I enjoy this. I mean, particularly with guys like you who are, from your own point of view, are involved, and with you as a layperson involved, and you yourself as head of the Jackson Center, it's called.
Jackson Center, yeah.
Jackson Center. I value the opportunity to be able to share these events with you.
Yeah,
I
you know,
really do.
I got to reflect on. We've just gone 2 hours of interviewing Ernest Michel. And it's gone, first of all, like this, and we haven't even got out of getting him to the United States.
No, I know.
We're 60 years out. I mean, think about that. Your career.
By the way, have you got a job now? Because I'm trying to raise $75 million for a building. I got a job for you.
Those days are behind me now,
Okay,
you know.
well, I'll let you.
Yeah. In fact, I know a state called Bavaria. They're looking to raise only $5 million.
Well, I'm involved with I'm on the board of the Holocaust Museum in New York. I play a very important.
Dumb? Where did
And
that word,
don't
where
ask-
did that
you-
word come from? Who coined the word Holocaust?
I understand it was Elie Wiesel.
Really?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Incidentally, you shut this off now. Do me a favor.
I will. The evidence. You know, you cannot be an effective Holocaust denier if you read the transcripts of the Nuremberg trial. I mean, think about that. I mean, this was evidence that was presented, which there was defense counsel, opportunities to object.
Am I the defense?
Yeah, well, but everybody had a chance in a court to we object, or that's not true. But clearly, at one place, one time in history, there was this gathering of this massive evidence that the Germans had, and actually aired out in open court. And now it's there. Whether it's the movies you saw, like the Russian movie you saw, and that must. I mean, I think about that too. We didn't even ask about it, but that's something you sat in court while they were playing the movie.
Sure, that's one of the things I'll talk about today.
and
When
then
I
we'll-
showed the movie.
Which reminds me, he needs a copy of that man, which he does not have.
Yep.
I got to ask you a question about a chemist, Chaim Weizmann.
Yeah,
Did you know?
I saw him. I never met
You never
him.
met him.
I never met him. He became the job was originally offered to Einstein.
Einstein.
Yeah.
I guess I knew that. Yeah. all
He
right.
was the job as president. The first president of Israel was offered to Albert Einstein,
Yes, I knew that.
and he said he's not qualified for that,
Yeah, I remember that.
and he turned it down. And therefore, they turned to Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann is the founder of the Weizmann Institute in Israel, which is a major scientific. I think you know that better than I know that.
Chaim Weizmann is.
Yeah.
I know about his science, and I know
Yeah.
about that. I do know because this is 1 year after the 100th anniversary of Einstein's,
Death.
force of
Birth, yeah.
papers. No,
Yeah.
the 1905 papers, which were
I see.
incredibly significant, for which he won the Nobel Prize, created what became the nuclear war, the nuclear efforts, and so on. He gets blamed for it, but
Do that.
you must read Again, American Prometheus.
Okay, about Oppenheimer.
Yeah, about Oppenheimer.
Yeah, I am. It's on my list that I wanted to
this
get.
dynamic of Einstein
I forgot the
color.
name of it.
Yeah,
You know,
I'll write it down.
Write it down. I get it from the library. Maybe it's still in print.
Buy the book.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to. One book I want to keep.
I don't have a business card of all things, but I'll get one.
Oh.
And,
Talking about that,
yeah, I want your.
I think it's in my book too. You see this here?
Right.
The dime. Many years ago, I spoke in Mississippi for UJA. And the person who invited me, a small, Greenville, Mississippi, small little town. And they asked me to speak to the small Jewish community that night about UJA and so forth. And before I came, the person who was running it says, would you be willing to speak to the local Rotary Club? You know? Well, I've been doing a lot of speaking, why not to the mayor? I'd be glad to do that. So I spoke at the Rotary Club at noon, and sitting there was the police head, what you call it, the sheriff, Bubba Jackson, same name.
Bubba Jackson.
Bubba Jackson.
Oh,
Bubba Jackson. That was, it was not his name, but Bubba Jackson. And I spoke about discrimination and what discrimination can lead to if it's taken, very openly. I don't mince words. And Bubba Jackson gets up and leaves the room. And the chairman of the Jewish community who's next to me says, "Oy, what's going on there? You really went too far." I said, "Well, I can't help it, This is what discrimination means." So the meeting is over. He drives me to the hotel, and on the way to the hotel, we go by the police, the head of the local sheriff's, and in the front of the street is Bubba Jackson. Halt. So the guy next to me says, "Oi, oi, oi, you surely stepped into some shit. Don't cut that."
It's nice thing I had it.
So stop. So he gets out. He says he wants to talk to you. And I don't know. I'm in this country only in a short while. I don't know what's going to happen to me. The sheriff in Greenville, Mississippi. And I get out and he says, "Come with me." So he stands outside in the car, and I go into the sheriff's office. And he says, "You're scared, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." He says, "Relax, I want to tell you something. I served in the Army, in the Air Corps, and we flew over that town where you come, what's it called? Mannheim. We took 30 missions over Mannheim.